For centuries, the forests of Germania have held a dark secret, the ghost of Rome's lost legion. They marched into history, and then nothing. Were they annihilated, captured, or did something even more unimaginable befall them? Join us as we meticulously retrace their final steps, sifting through historical whispers and archaeological fragments to finally uncover the truth behind Varus's doomed legion. At the heart of this mystery lies a single unnerving question. How did the most disciplined war machine on Earth vanish into rain and trees? To answer it, we have to stand where they stood, hear the drum of rain on shields, feel the road soften to mud beneath iron-nailed boots. We have to meet the men who shaped their fate. One emperor haunted, one general undone, and one chieftain who learned Rome's language, only to turn it against Rome itself. Year 9 of the Common Era. The northern frontier is supposed to be calm. After years of campaigning under Tiberius, Rome believes Germania west of the Weser is tamed, its tribes bound by treaties and hostages, its pathways surveyed, its fields taxed. Governing this precarious peace is Publius Quinctilius Varus, a patrician, an administrator more than a warrior, the kind of man who turns people into receipts. He had presided over provinces before, even Syria, and brought the emperor tidy ledgers and a satisfied smile. Germania, he thinks, will become a province like the others. He brings magistrates, he brings law, brings the apparatus of Rome. And into Varus's circle walks Arminius, known to later ages as Herman, Cheruscan by blood, Roman by polish. Taken as a hostage in youth, hardened in Rome's auxiliary cavalry, he has the citizenship, the equestrian gold ring, and the quiet ability to look like what Rome wants to see: gratitude, loyalty, an ally who speaks fluent Latin. He studies the drills. He watches the engineers build bridges and roads. He learns how long a marching column stretches, how a Roman commander thinks, how an army becomes vulnerable when it believes the horizon is safe. Then the whispers begin. A distant tribe is in revolt. Nothing large, Varus is told, just enough to require the governor's presence, to show the flag and remind the locals who truly rules the woods. Arminius, all helpful efficiency, recommends a route through the hills and the oak forest. He will guide them. He assures Varus the path is sound. Another voice, frantic, tries to cut through the fog. Segestes, an older chieftain bound to Rome, warns Varus that Arminius is not what he seems. Arrest him now, Segestes begs, while he stands in your camp unarmed. Varus refuses. He will not insult a friend. He will not believe that peace lies. The decision is human. And fatal, the column moves. 3 legions, XVIII close to 20,000 heavy infantry, with auxiliaries marching in looser files. Behind them camp followers, smiths and teamsters, cooks and children, wagons heavy with supplies. The Roman line is a living thing, iron and flesh strung along a winding track between ridge and bog. The sky darkens and Germania breathes. Rain comes down in sheets and the trail slickens into treachery. Shields become heavier. Cloaks cling. Each footstep is a small war. In the trees, figures move with the patience of hunters. The first attacks are pinpricks, javelins from the gloom, stones from slings, a quick rush at the rear guard, then silence. Varus calls his tribunes close, orders a camp to be fortified. The men, soaked and exhausted, dig ditches that collapse in the downpour. They light fires that sputter and die. In the night, there is the hiss of arrows and the sound of horses screaming in the dark morning. The column tries to move again. It cannot form its famous lines in this cramped, choking forest. The weight of armor that protects in open fields becomes a drowning anchor in mud. The baggy trousers of the Germanic warriors, sneered at by Romans, are perfect for the marsh. Overconfidence becomes a millstone. Reconnaissance, light and sloppy, has left them blind. Above all, there is the terrain, indifferent and cruel, a third enemy. Arminius doesn't need to defeat the legions, he just needs to make the forest do it for him. He leads bands along ridges they know by heart, appearing and vanishing, guiding the Romans deeper, stripping away officers and cohesion with each hour. The discipline, the drilling, The beautiful geometry of war that the legions embody cannot solve a path that narrows to a knife edge, or a bog that swallows a mule alive. Day bleeds into day. Varus improvises not without courage. He orders baggage burned to free the column. He tries to find higher ground, but the killing ground is already waiting. Near what we now call Kalkriese, between hill and mire, a low earthen rampart runs like a scar, built in secret by hands that knew exactly what would funnel a heavy infantry column into panic. Behind that rampart, the woods boil with men. The Romans see it and know. This is no minor uprising. This is the trap. The left buckles under a rain of spears. The right collapses into a bog that grabs boots and refuses to let them go. Signifers, the men who carry the brass eagles, try to haul their standards forward, those shining symbols of Rome's eternity. Arrows find them. Some bury the eagles in the muck rather than see them raised in enemy hands. Others cannot. The sound is everywhere, the crack and thud of javelins, the iron dull percussion of sword on shield, the wet choke of men dying in mud. Commanders fall. Centurions die standing, their vine staves useless in the storm. Varus, wounded and seeing the map of the empire shrivel to the size of a muddy ravine, makes his last decision. He falls on his sword, the old Roman answer, when there is nothing left to command. His officers follow, one by one, choosing death over the humiliation their enemies have in mind for them. The column disintegrates. What remains is not an army but pockets of men hacked into silence. The forest swallows the sound when it is over. The rain keeps falling. Some are taken alive. A few will be ransomed years later, their faces creased by a different life. Others will disappear into long houses, working fields under new names. Some will be fed to altars. The Germans are thorough in their triumph. The enemy's bones are left where they fall. A warning in white. Heads are nailed to trees. The 3 eagles are carried away like pieces of the sun. And then the message rides to Rome? Imagine the doors tearing open, the courier mudman splattered, the Senate's murmurs rising like a nervous animal. Imagine the emperor receiving the news. Augustus is not young anymore. He has spent a lifetime bending the world to his rhythm, turning chaos into marble and law. When he hears what has happened in the northern forests, something in that rhythm breaks. The man who never shows panic stops pretending. He tears at his clothes. He lets his beard grow. He wanders the palace at night, banging his head against door frames, crying out into the darkness, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." He knows the numbers, he knows the names, XVIII, XVIII. He knows those numbers will never be issued again. He decrees they remain empty, a wound recorded in the ledger of Rome until the end of time. The aftermath is not just grief, it is political shock. Rome has sworn to itself that it is invincible. Suddenly the map looks different. The line that was supposed to march from the Rhine to the Elbe shudders, then retreats. The appetite for annexation north of the Rhine curdles. Senators who once crowed about Germania going the way of Gaul begin to speak of restraint, of consolidation. Augustus commands Tiberius to stabilize, not to gamble. Forts along the Rhine bristle with new timber. Roads are repaired that lead back into safety rather than forward into dark. And in every camp, tales are told of the forest, a monster that eats men and spits out their helmets for crows to pick at. Vengeance, though, is a language Rome understands. When Augustus dies, the ritual grief of an empire is interrupted by a practical matter, Germany. Tiberius, now emperor and no friend to heroic risk, still sends legions east under Germanicus, the golden nephew Rome adores. The river crossings shudder under the weight of his army. The banners go forward. Germanicus does not speak of easy victories. He speaks of graves because the graves are still there. In one of the most harrowing moments recorded by our sources, Germanicus leads his men back through the killing ground. They find bones whitening in clearings, heaped in piles where men formed circles and died back to back. So are Tamari Fork, scattered along the lines of march where rain dragged a final step into a final fall. They find pits that were shrines. They find tree trunks where heads once stared. They find altars stained dark. The veterans among them look at the things that were their friends and understand the price of a mistake. Germanicus orders the dead buried. He stands over the trench and prays, a general and a priest, making peace with a place that knows no peace. The campaigns that follow are vicious. Roman columns burn villages. Germanic bands strike the flanks and fade. There are pitched battles at Idistaviso along the Weser and at the Angravarian Wall, where Germanicus finally beats Arminius in open ground. In the chaos of pursuit, he almost captures him. Almost. Arminius slips away, bleeding, furious, alive. 2 of the lost eagles are recovered in these campaigns, torn from shrines and dirty treasure hoards, lifted high again in hands that shake. The 3rd eagle, it is said, will not return until decades later under another emperor. Eventually, Tiberius recalls Germanicus. Victory has been made sufficiently public. The vengeance is declared complete. The frontier remains the frontier. The Rhine becomes a wall in the mind, and Arminius? He becomes a man too large for his house. He will be praised, then feared, then murdered by his own kin. Power in the forest is a spear with no right place to hold it. This would be the end of the tale, if bones and words were all we had. But the ground itself remembered. Centuries later, when the story of Varus's disaster was an antique warning in brittle books, a different kind of army arrived. Archaeologists. Some were soldiers first, men who carried maps, not shields. In the late 20th century, near the village of Kalkriese, a British officer named Tony Clun began to walk fields with a metal detector after drilling. He found coins, hundreds of Roman coins datable to the reign of Augustus. He found lead sling bullets that once flew with lethal music. He found the past fissuring under the surface. Excavations followed, careful, patient, scientific. What they uncovered looked like the script of our sources, written in earth and bone. There was the long earthen wall, a turf rampart running along a sandy ridge, anchored by a ditch and interlaced with stones. This was no natural ridge. It was a man-made knife set, exactly where it had to be set, forcing any army into a slaughter channel between hill and bog. The distribution of artifacts matched a line of march under attack, dense clusters of hobnails from soldier-esque sandals where men fell en masse, bent pila heads, shattered scabbards, fragments of shields, fittings from harness and carts. There was a cavalry face mask, smooth, impersonal, eerie, its iron features once shining on a Roman horseman, eaten by soil and time. In pits, there were human and animal bones commingled, not neat graves but hurried disposals. It fits the narrative of chaos and of later Roman burial parties gathering what they could. Coins told the calendar. Most were freshly minted in the first years of the century, with Augustus's profile crisp, some countermarked in ways that fit provincial circulation. The sheer number suggested an army caught and stripped in motion. The angle of spearheads buried into berms of earth suggested volleys thrown low and hard from behind cover. It was as if the fog of the past lifted for a moment and we could see shapes moving. And Zasadere Koster, hear the tremor of men breaking. Feel the rain again on faces that looked up and saw only black trees whispering. Did these finds prove beyond doubt that Kalkriese was the final day? For most scholars, yes, the correlation is overwhelming. The terrain mirrors Dio's description, the artifacts match. The scale is right. If you stand on the ridge on a gray day and listen, you can almost hear the eagles going quiet. And what then truly happened to Varus's legion? The simplest version is the truest and the hardest. They died. They were cut apart over days by a leader who understood them, in a place they did not understand. They were not swallowed by magic or by some exotic sea. They were devoured by rain and planning and rage. Some survived as slaves in unfamiliar homes, forced to teach their captors Roman drill for sport, to stand on makeshift platforms while beer foamed and laughter shook the beams. Some were ransomed, some were sacrificed to gods whose names they never bothered to learn. Varus himself ended as a head on someone else's table, sent by Arminius to the rival king Maroboduus, who prudently forwarded it to Rome. Augustus buried that head with honor. When he walked past the mausoleum after, he must have felt the building lean, but the real aftermath was written not in funerary stone, but in policy. Rome's grand project to annex Germania collapsed into caution. The empire tightened its belt. The line of the Rhine became not a temporary pause but a declaration. Forts multiplied. Watchtowers blinked messages along the river at night. The legions that had been lost remained lost. No XVIII, no XVIII, no XVIII ever again. A permanent silence in the roll call. It is hard to overstate how deeply this silence dug into Roman psychology. There were mutinies on the Rhine when Augustus died, legions howling for better pay and shorter service, the ground itself feeling like a treacherous heirloom. The aura of infallibility had been chipped. The emperor, who had turned a city of brick into marble, died knowing that there were places where marble did not matter. And yet the legacy of the Teutoburg disaster is not only caution, it is a stubborn, sobering wisdom. That knowledge of terrain and of your enemy's mind matters more than flags and songs. That an empire can be undone by believing its own stories. That sometimes the greater strength is not found in pushing further, but in understanding where to stop. If Rome had broken Arminius and swept past the Elbe, the map of Europe might read differently. Germanic languages might not ring from the Baltic to the Alps. The frontier might have set 200 miles east, or Rome might have exhausted itself bleeding into forests that do not care who owns them. History is not a single road, it is a forest of forks. Arminius, for all his complexity, hero and traitor, patriot and opportunist, understood something essential, that the Roman machine is deadly at noon in a field under a clear sky, but it can be made to stumble in shadow and rain. He took Roman training and turned it inside out. He weaponized trust. Hermann's masterstroke was not merely the ambush. It was the months of feasts and smiles and friendship that laid the trap. Overconfidence did the rest. Poor reconnaissance sealed it. The land itself, its bogs, its tight paths, its watchful trees, finished the work. We have seen what the writers told us. We have seen what the earth shows us. So I ask you now, what was the most crucial factor in Rome's defeat? Was it Varus's blindness? Arminius's cunning? The rainstorm that soaked through discipline to the bone? Or the arrogance of an empire that believed maps were destiny? Leave your judgment. Argue in the comments. Because this is not just a story about the past. It is a mirror. When Germanicus buried those bones, he did not bury the lesson. He left it for us. That power without humility walks into forests it cannot read. And sometimes, the only thing an empire leaves behind is a mask staring up from the dirt and a whisper that says, in a voice like wind through pines, remember,